that. Anyway, what happens is there was an exercise in June, and it was supposed to. The bombs were put in there under the cover of a NATO exercise. There were a lot of different countries running around with divers and blowing up things. It was an exercise to go find and chase mines. There never had been one before. It actually was whoever in the CIA or the other agencies that thought this up should get a bow, because it was pretty ingenious. So in that exercise, the divers went down, did what they were trained to do. They're very good. C4. A couple hundred, whatever the weight is, bombs enough to blow up most cities, most buildings in Washington, and maybe some in New York. Anyway, they did their job, but the president at the last minute hesitated because he was afraid blowing it up right after the exercise would put the finger at us, and then he wanted permission to do it anytime, and that caused an enormous trouble in the team. The team was, people are sophisticated in the intelligence services. I know we have cliches about them. We see the movies about them. And the bottom line is this made sense of them blowing up a pipeline, it's actually owned by a division of Gazprom runs 51%. That's all the Russian oligarchs. And 49% of the Nord Stream 1 are owned by 4 business groups in the Western Europe who farm out the oil. Anyway, they saw the threat as being valid. And if he wanted to do it during an exercise, well, okay. But in September, late September, they got the word, they fixed it so he could. But then they thought it was, I don't know what they thought, but I don't think they thought in late September he would blow up the main pipeline, Nord Stream 2, which is a new one that had been just built. And it had been sanctioned. It had gas in it. That's why so much leaks. 750 miles of methane gas were sitting in it. But it had been sanctioned by the German government. And so when he did that, here's what Biden did. And this is what I think the ultimate point of the story, and why so many people, even the intelligence community, are very troubled by it. What he did is he said, I'm in a big war with Ukraine. It's not looking good. I want to be sure I get German and West European support. And I know winter's coming. And if it's going to be bad, I don't want the Germans to say, we got to check out because we're getting massacred. We'll be massacred with no cheap fuel. And our economy will go bonkers. We're going to check out and we're going to open up the gas line, which they could do. So he took away that option. And what that has done, as America has been talking about ever since the first pipeline, Nord Stream 1, came online in 2011, and there were years before it was being built. This goes back to the Bush-Cheney years, and as you know, I did a lot of reporting for the New Yorker on those people. That particular gaggle. Anyway, and at that time they began to talk about the threat, the threat of gas, the threat of cheap energy for Europe, would always seen as a threat to make Europe be more palatable or more willing to trade with Russia. We always wanted to isolate Russia. This has been a theme of the last decades.
Well, Simon, but can I ask you also there are several people, obviously you've gotten criticism at times for many of your exposés, but there are some people who are saying that this particular expose does not have a whole lot of documentation, that it essentially relies on one source one internal source, anonymous source of yours. How do you respond to those criticisms that this is much less documented than previous exposés of yours?
I'll get to that, but let me finish my thought because it's a very important thought. The fear was Europe would pass away, walk away from the war. And now what he's done, and you have to lift it up a little bit. There you go. There. Now what he's done is he's told Europe, you're second rate. And I think the consequences of this for the Europeans are going to be horrific. This has cut into the notion that they can depend totally on America, even in a crisis. And I think it's going to undercut NATO, which I always found to be supremely useless. But certainly the European countries are going to be, I know people that are paying 5 times as much now for electricity. People are paying 3 or 4 times more for gas. There's not enough of it. It's very expensive. It's colder now than it was in the fall. They had a light fall because of climate change, if you want to believe it or not. And anyway, I think the consequences politically for us are enormous. I think the reason that Biden and his people in the White House have denied the story and continue to deny it and get accepted by some of the press, my old newspaper, the New York Times, I don't know why they're not doing more reporting on this instead of relying on a denial and walking away from the story. Ditto for the Washington Post. I think the consequences politically for us in the long run, looking at even potential some countries walking out of NATO. If that's what he thinks, that our being cold is less important than him keeping a war going that he's not going to win, it strikes me. As for the source question, I've been doing this so long. I'm not bothered by the fact that the government attacks me and that my old newspaper, the New York Times, hasn't written a word about it. I find it sort of, that's where we are. That's why people like me are in Substack. It's a self-publishing thing. I don't have to worry about censorship or second thoughts. But I don't talk about sources. I just, I'm lucky. I've had for 20 or 30 or 40 years people inside who not only are faithful to what they're doing, but also are not afraid to be critical of it. And so that's the kind of source that, reporters, dream about. And I've had people like that for forever, and I still do. And so there's been a lot of criticism. One of the things I will get to your point about criticism, one of the criticisms of the open source people, OSINT, it's a very big part of the world now. There are people that monitor air traffic and boat traffic and all that. And there's some 2 or 3 different groups have produced statements saying that none of the things they see tracks with my story. And I would say about that, if you're in the intelligence community and you've been running covert ops for years and you're in Norway, we're working very closely with the Norwegians on this, who, by the way, have increased their production of oil to Europe by double it. It was, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's gone up at least double, maybe even more than that, 2.5 times as much now without the pipeline. But certainly, the first thing you look at is how to take care of open source people, make them think what happened isn't happening. I mean, that's so obvious to me, but not to them. And so.
Sai, I wanted to go to what Ned Price said at the State Department. Sam Husseini of the Institute for Public Accuracy questioned the State Department spokesperson about your reporting last week.
I'm sure you're aware of the new report from Seymour Hörsch, How America Took Out the Nord Stream pipeline and the White House's denial of any involvement. Given the longstanding U.S. opposition to the pipeline, Secretary Blinken's calling its demise a tremendous opportunity, and Undersecretary of State Nuland's saying that the U.S. officials were pleased with the destruction of the pipeline, and especially the Sweden's secretive investigation. Do you think the U.S. government's denial of involvement is credible?
I absolutely do, and I repeat it here. Anything else?
Let me follow up on that, if I might. Have you or anybody else at the State Department been in communication with German, Norwegian ambassadors or other allies or officials on this matter?
On the matter of Nord Stream 2?
On the matter of the latest allegations, which give a fairly, I mean, it's one anonymous source, but it is a fairly detailed,
it would not be it would not be typical for us to engage allies and partners on something that is utter and complete nonsense and that should be rejected out of hand by anyone who is looking at it through an objective lens. Yes, go ahead.
One more aspect on this. One of the allegations that Hörsch makes is that it was taken off the CIA in order to prevent involvement, oversight as a covert operation. Did you read the piece?
I'm familiar with it.
One of his allegations is that it was taken off the CIA.
Look, rather than let this propaganda be aired in the briefing room, but let me just say it is a fundamental misunderstanding of oversight in our U.S. Congress. Beyond getting his facts entirely wrong, as he has before in very high-profile ways, it is a fundamental misunderstanding to suggest that our intelligence community is not subject to oversight. Anyone who writes that, who writes anything like that, should not be believed on any fact that he or she puts forward.
That it was taken off of a CIA and put under military in order to prevent.
Our military is also subject to rigorous oversight.
That's my question. That's
yes,
my question.
The answer is yes.
So that's Ned Price being questioned by Sam Husseini.